Liverpool var europæiske kulturhovedstad tilbage i 2008. Aarhus bliver det i 2017. Potentialet i begivenheden er enorm, og ikke mindst turistmæssigt. Det ved Ruth en hel masse om. For 4 år siden var hun Program Manager og Senior Researcher i forbindelse med den store event i Liverpool. Så derfor så kender hun evalueringen efter eventen i detaljer, og hun ved, hvad effekten af hele projektet var. Det kommer hun ind på, og hun supplerer med, hvad man gjorde for at få spredt projektet ud, så det angik mere end bare lige den store havneby Liverpool. Og det er jo ikke mindst interessant, når vi snakker om Kulturby Aarhus 2017. Hvordan bliver det til en Region Midtjylland event? Det er en af store udfordringer i forbindelse med det. En lille detalje omkring Ruth og Liverpool, og ja, hun holder med Liverpool FC. Ruth, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inflicting the traditional Liverpool greeting of having to declare your allegiance to a football club. I actually moved to Liverpool in 1996, arrived with no real football interest or allegiance, left with an obligatory allegiance. I had to declare whether I was Liverpool or Everton within sort of minutes of meeting everybody, so I just took I sort of had a bit of a think. I've been to one game. It was very boring. But apparently it was a boring game.
Shouldn't have said that.
So I'm going to talk a bit about Liverpool's experience of being European Capital of Culture. I was the manager of a very large research programme which was run alongside the Capital of Culture experience, and I worked independently of the management company. I worked for the two local biggest universities. There are actually 4 universities in Liverpool, so there was a lot of academic interest in this. We carried out an independent research study looking at the multiple impacts of Capital of Culture. And interestingly, this was taken up, in some ways the research programme itself became part of the impact of Liverpool, and I'm still talking about it. This is 2008, and I'm still coming to talk to cities around Europe who are looking at replicating not just the success of Liverpool as an event, but actually the discussion and the stories around it that came out of it, which were partly a result of researching and really understanding the change that happened. And Aarhus is already off to a good start, because even before being chosen, so as they were beginning to think about bidding, they got in touch with people really from all over Europe to talk about what the lessons were from other cities, but also what the potential for research is. And hopefully there will be an interestingly large research programme in Aarhus in 2017, which would maybe learn from some of the things that were done elsewhere and have been developed since. Just to give you a bit of an idea of what happened in the year. It was expensive. It cost, I put it in euro in case that was helpful, I didn't put it in krona, but it cost £130 million, which was spent over a 6-year period. The way Liverpool ran the event was to see it as a programme of change, which kind of started in around 2005, maybe even 2004, really culminating in 2008. So they spent actually over 6 years, including setup. They put on over 41,000 events. I was in charge of working out how we were going to count how many the events were and what counted and what didn't count. So this was an interesting challenge. And these events weren't just, so when I say 41,000, these events would include things put on by all sorts of different organisations, not simply the actual official cultural company. And those were some of the most exciting ones, the sort of collaborative events that happened. A total audience of 18 million, including and really involving 1,000 active volunteers, which I'll mention later. And basically there was a huge feeling of positivity around the experience. So 80% thought the events were good or very good. And I think quite a lot of them thought they were extremely good. You know, there was a really strong number. I think 1% thought they were very bad. It was very, very low, given that there's a tendency to complain in certainly in Liverpool if necessary. So overall it was a very positive experience. I thought I'd focus particularly on the business experience and impacts today. Thinking sort of about the different roles that the business sector as a whole can play in this sort of process. One of the key roles is obviously sponsors. And I think perhaps an interesting way of seeing that is not simply what you can give, but actually developing a partnership together. Now, I think in Liverpool they began the idea. They had organisational sponsors, so they had 32 sponsors. But they also had a business club which was free to join called 08 Business Connect. And this was around really sharing information and going beyond the obvious partners around what the potential opportunities were arising from European Capital of Culture status. So to a degree, I mean, obviously Britain is a much more inward-looking country, and even understanding the benefits of it having the word European in the title was something. So helping people see that potential, helping people understand how their business could potentially gain. I had a phone call from somebody from a tarmac, road surfacing company, and he was asking me what his business could do, which I thought was, I didn't have an answer, but I thought was not that creative. I passed him on to them though. But he joined, and hopefully he found something, that there was some way that he could harness this opportunity. And lots of things did come out of this connection. They would have business breakfast. To some degree, it was a funded business club, but there were trade conferences of all sorts of different types of organisation came over, including there's a big solicitors conference, and there was a massive physiotherapist or some sort of associated medical conference. Absolutely, thousands and thousands came over. So there was all these things that were linked into it, which arose from these different business clubs. And this is carried on, and it's now part of the Economic Development Company. It's carried on. So there's this sort of ways of getting involved. The sponsors, we asked the sponsors about why they got involved, and often it was a very emotional response. It wasn't actually necessarily initially a business decision. They had a sort of link to the city, and they wanted to promote the city. But there was also this issue about building brand awareness. So the train companies operating up to the region wanted to get a bigger share of the market and take people off the roads. There was people trying to move into different sectors, thought it would be useful to link in. And there was a lot of wish to build business-to-business relationships beyond the obvious sectors, which gave an opportunity to do that. And there was a sense from somebody, I quite like this quote, that it was something you couldn't not do, that if you were a company based in Liverpool, then you had to be part of it, because it was going to be a big thing, and you were going to be part of that big thing. And I think to a degree it was about, this person said this before it happened, and he said it almost like he'd actually been lobbying to make changes, so he'd actually become part of the decision-making process. He said, I'm part of it, but I'm asking for things as well. It's going to be exciting, but I'm going to help make it exciting. I'm going to make sure that my ideas, which obviously had quite a range of entrepreneurial ideas, that they would be fed into the process. So this guy had also brought the corporate social responsibility, but also the I don't know what it's called. It's the sort of HR idea, the idea of adding value to your employees by them doing volunteering outside the workplace. And he'd really used it as a way of making his company a better employer, and won some prizes for it. But he and they liked that. So employees liked the fact they could volunteer, and then it could be part of their continuing professional development. But they felt that you had to be in it. There was quite a clear sponsorship structure. Where you could put a lot of money in. We asked them why, this is a quote of you, why would you be in at this? And somebody said, well, if you're going to do it, you've got to be the top level. You're not going to want to be anywhere else. But there was also another level of people who would supply. So this was met quite often in kind. There was a whole range of clothing for the volunteers was provided free of charge as part of a sponsorship deal. There was catering support. I'm smirking at this. It was the local bakery, had very unhealthy catering. We had like donuts and sausage rolls. We had like really unhealthy food for all the volunteers. So we were making jokes about unhealthy options, but basically they had all the catering came from one supplier. So maybe you can have, I personally wouldn't have gone with that decision because it didn't tie with this healthy. They had a whole year of health, and we were thinking that we shouldn't be feeding people sausage rolls in the year of health. But they did have different ways of getting involved, and they had media partners who obviously took a role like that. When we asked sponsors about what benefits they got, they all started talking about what the city got, and I thought that was quite interesting because it's actually very much they were very tied in and became really part of the process of changing Liverpool, and I'll explain a bit more about that later. But they did feel that there was an issue around potential for brand awareness, and they had worried initially that if Liverpool 08 was a failure, there would be a sort of knock-on effect because there was some concerns. But actually, in the end, they weren't too worried about it. And the other thing is that they hadn't really engaged with culture before. Pretty much every single organisation that got involved was new to cultural events and cultural funding. It wasn't around culture, it was around turning the city around and doing things for the city. I mean, there was, in the run-up to Liverpool 2008, there were a lot of concerns about, and lots of bad news stories, and lots of, worries that it wasn't going to work. And I think even there was this issue in Aarhus earlier this year about, the bid, got some criticism at the first stage, and maybe we're not going to win. And so I think that you've got to be ready for this because it will happen everywhere, and it certainly happened in Liverpool. But in the end, no one can remember that. They only remember the success. The second business sector role was as delivery partners. And specifically, I think, there are some quite complicated procurement rules in the UK, so there was limits on what the company could guarantee to give to the non-paying partners, but there was a real attempt to give business benefits across, and obviously you received information very early on about what was going on, and links in and funding of different committees. But there was some work done around getting the tourism sector ready for an influx of more foreign tourists. And there was two particular programmes. One was the 08 Welcome, which had this kind of flag of, are you ready to make the most of 2008? And basically it was free to any visitor-facing business in the city region, and you can make a case for things outside the sector being visitor-facing, but it was mainly taken up by hotels and tourist attractions, and they had a specific schedule for taxi drivers. I don't know what your taxi drivers are like, but there's a tradition in Britain that they all moan about everything. And there's this quite a sort of slightly unsettling experience of getting into taxis in Liverpool and being told how great it is, and being told everything's going really well, being greeted in a range of languages as well. So they offered training. They put sort of different courses onto for employees. What I thought was interesting about it was that they particularly focused on keeping that local difference. I mean, Liverpool's got a reputation in the UK for being incredibly friendly, more informal than usual, a bit jokey, a bit teasing, but sort of very initially very, very friendly beyond maybe what you would expect. And they said, this is good, keep this, keep a bit of the accent, maybe slow down. I speak very slowly for a Liverpool person. And maybe lose some of the kind of, the slang's good, but maybe you need to tone it down. So they actually keep the things that make Liverpool great. And it was really interesting to get, to sort of listen to people really being told to make the best of what they could offer. And actually, the other thing was that they would make sure that everybody knew what all the events were. So there'd be regular email bulletins saying what events are put on. But also they'd have history lessons about just the key events or interesting facts, and you would just get them reeled off. It was really funny. So I'd be getting history lessons when you got in a taxi, quite interesting ones. And taxi drivers were being enterprising and offering, because they already offered tours of Beatles experiences. You can go and have that anyway. But they were offering different sort of tours when you got in and trying to market it. So people were really taking this up and being quite knowledgeable. So, and it felt like the whole city was ready to welcome you. It worked quite well. The other programme, which was the 08 Volunteers, which was really popular, and I think a lot of people volunteered for this who've never volunteered before. the idea was that they would actively help with events. They helped with events put on by the culture company, but they actually offered help at events across the entire city region. So it didn't have to be put on by the culture company. They became a kind of workforce, an additional workforce, particularly giving out flyers, offering information, and they were dotted around sort of the entry points to the city. And they were really nice because they were local, ordinary people, and they would tell you about strange things, you know, things you wouldn't normally find out about. You know, the back streets experiences, the really good cafes that would serve a good English fry-up. I spoke to a woman whose mother was extremely upper class, came from London, and she loved this sort of back street, dirty tour of Liverpool, you know, this is where the real people go. I was sitting next to a dustbin, a dustman collecting, you know. I met a taxi driver as a friend, you know, so they had that kind of sort of interaction, and it gave a real sense of the city. And it really left a large group of people quite keen to promote culture. And in fact, the top picture, those five people, they are actually called Liverpool Cultural Champions, and their job is to promote culture to the community at large, and to actually and also to promote the community's interest into culture, so that there's a kind of dialogue between it. And it came out of the volunteer scheme because people were so keen to carry on doing something at the end of 2008 that there was a competition to be cultural champions. And they had quite a lot of people applying. And they take it really seriously. They go to events and they write little blogs about them, and they run projects and things like that. So there's been quite a sort of carry on of local interest in this. The business sector's experiences and the feedback we got were overwhelmingly positive. I mean, so focusing on the tourism sector, basically all the larger companies were like 100% positive. It'd been extremely good, no problems whatsoever. I mean, there might be a couple of comments, but I can't even remember what those were. I think that was probably 2 or 3 people who weren't positive or very positive about it. As overall, extremely positive experience. There have been some fears about communication and messages getting across, about big events organised by the town, by the city, sort of swamping smaller independent events. But in fact, what they discovered was there's a crossover, and people would just go to both. People would just come to Liverpool and turn up and say, hello, I'm here to show me your culture, not to specifically go to an event. So there was a real opportunity for all the existing visitor infrastructure to just benefit from just lots of interested people. They felt that the bigger impact was the change in perception of Liverpool and Merseyside. And in fact, for Liverpool, this was in the UK, this was about changing it from a negative perception to a positive perception. But I think there's potential, and I've talked in other places, where it's about changing it from a kind of neutral, there's nothing wrong with it, but why would we bother coming to actually, here's my image, here's my one thing. And that's what came across, the Liverpool's one thing. It's extremely friendly, and there's lots to do. And I had to feedback on this, that the culture company, which was the managing organisation for the European Capital of Culture, overall, there was a positive view of their work, but it really came out as to the more you put in, the more you got out of it. People generally felt there was an increase in turnover, or reported an increase in turnover, and also that these turnover increases were more common in 2008 than in previous years. I need to say this because I'll just go on to the fact that there were other things happening as well. And there's also, there were concerns, and there was a reality check that there would be a decrease in 2009. But for us, the test was whether it would come back up again in 2010 and 11 and onwards. And there was a feeling in 2009 that this would happen. There was a positive feeling, and actually it has. I've got some figures now. Finally got some figures out, because obviously these are very, they come out really late, these figures. So I've just got figures for 2011 now. And the other interesting thing was that the visitor economy, the visitor sector, was really very positive about effects, But the actual wider business community, and we're talking about, you know, all sorts of different types of businesses, quite a lot of IT, a lot of service sector businesses. They all felt that there would be an effect coming through, and that has been borne out, particularly in attracting inward investment and attracting higher level managers due to the feeling. And the feeling was very much that the more you put into the experience, the more you got involved in helping shape the capital of culture experience, the more your company could get out of it. You're more able you were to respond to the opportunities, because it was about the language exchange, that the people promoting it spoke with one language. It wasn't necessarily the visitor economy language, but actually understanding those opportunities came from discussing them and building partnerships to actually benefit from these. Liverpool 2008 happened within a context of growth and change in Liverpool, and we asked people questions about which of these things were most important in terms of the economy of the city. And I'm just pointing out that it's not, because actually Liverpool, I mean, I studied Liverpool 2008, it was absolutely the centre of what I was doing, but it wasn't absolutely the centre of everything that was happening in the region. And that would be true for any of these European capitals of culture. They happen within a wider environment. The airport was growing, and Ryanair really went for Liverpool in a really big way. And Liverpool built a lot of links and improved the transport infrastructure between the airport, which is sort of, it's out of town, but it's sort of on the edge of the city, into the town, which was really beneficial. And obviously you've got the same thing with Ryanair's focus on Billund and the potential there. Objective 1 of Liverpool is an Objective 1 region from Europe, so there's quite a lot of money still remaining. ACC is, I should have written that more clearly, it's a big new convention centre, which meant that finally we were able to host huge conferences, the mega conferences in Liverpool. And obviously that was felt to be really important. You can see that's essential for growth for 80% of people. Obviously football, Grand National, racing, the Beatles, and the cruise liner terminal was new again, so the biggest cruise ships in the world can now dock at Liverpool, and they have a huge spend, people coming from these. So Liverpool was there, the capital of culture was there, but it isn't the only thing, and it's in a wider environment, and I think everyone viewed it as such and actually was realistic about that. Thinking about the regional picture and the visitor economy impacts beyond Liverpool, the context is slightly different, I think, for Liverpool 2008 from Aarhus 2017, in that Liverpool isn't the biggest of its region. It's not the biggest city in its region. I'm not allowed to say that in Liverpool, but it's actually true. So Liverpool's in a large region, the northwest, which has got a 7 million population. Maybe a better comparator for Aarhus in 2017 would be the city region area. I was trying to get maps that gave you a bit of a sense of how it works. So obviously the red and the yellow one, this is the northwest of England. But this area here, this map here, the dark area is actually politically Liverpool city region. And the pale area is where the economic hinterland of Liverpool is. And so there's a 1.4 million population of Liverpool city region. Interestingly, funding-wise, there was zero funding from the city region into Liverpool 08. There was some regional funding, which was really European money, and there was a bit of national funding, but pretty much it was funded by Liverpool City Council. 60% of funding came from Liverpool, the city itself. So it's a very city-based programme, and in fact, the benefits for the region came, or the city region came, purely as a benefit to the region. So I think in Aarhus you have a different opportunity to actually build much more of a regional offer and see it more regionally. But despite all this, the Liverpool 2008, it really changed the context and the way the region marketed itself. And I'm not sure how well people know, because Liverpool has a really good reputation in the world, but in England it had an absolutely terrible reputation until recently. So basically, people who live in the rest of the city region, which was never called Liverpool City Region, it was called Merseyside, they did not want to live in Liverpool, so they didn't want to have postcodes with Liverpool in them. They wouldn't put Liverpool in their address. They put Merseyside, which is it's not that well known in the UK, never mind anywhere else. And it had an extremely negative image. I have my Scouse jokes. If you Google Scouse jokes, this is the sort of things you get. Scouse just means Liverpool, Liverpudlian. So what would you see? What do you do if you see a Scouse jogging? You trip him up and you give the lady's purse back. Yeah. These are all made up by people from Liverpool, or quite often from the area around Liverpool. And what's the difference? This is my favourite. What's the difference between Batman and a Scouser? Batman can go anywhere without Robin. So. And this was a real typical thing, you know, sort of like cars in Liverpool, they wouldn't have any wheels, they would just be on bricks. It's a place full of thieves, people don't work. It would be a very negative place to go. I moved there in '96 and I was working in a little corner shop, and all my customers were saying, why are you going to go there? You're going to get stolen, you're going to get robbed, you're going to get burgled, you're going to get beaten up, there's lots of violence, people are really horrible, it's really dangerous. It was an incredibly negative view. And it's what's quite interesting is that that's really turned around. So I moved away from Liverpool, to my shame and horror. I left Liverpool 3 years ago. And now when I tell people I've been in Liverpool, people say, oh, I've really wanted to go there. It must be really interesting living in Liverpool. I've not had one joke in the last 3 years about Liverpool. That's real change. The reality is that despite what the feeling was, Liverpool actually had a much better brand beyond the UK. I mean, I think Merseyside, the rest of the region really needed to wake up and recognise that. And pretty much they had a brand with a built-in interest coming from the Beatles, which was a largely US and Japanese, now Chinese, visitor base. Honestly, I lived about 3 doors down from where Ringo Starr lived for a year when he was 2 or something, you know. And the number of times I'd come out of my house to find Japanese people taking photographs, like, you know, it was just everything they're everywhere. And there's a built-in market, and the Beatles did live outside Liverpool. They lived in Merseyside a bit. They weren't building on this enough. And obviously football, which is a European and world phenomenon. But with the change in the view of Liverpool, which sort of happened around 2008 to 2010, actually the sub-region has chosen to rebrand itself, and it is now calling itself Liverpool City Region, which is obviously, to me, a very sensible thing to actually see itself as. And what's interesting, I think, is that they're marketing the city and its hinterland, its area around it together, as a sort of whole. And this is a picture, hopefully it's readable, of the different sort of clusters and growth clusters from an economic development plan. And what's interesting about it, I've put little suns on wherever there was a tourism offer, because it wasn't at all clear from the distance. But basically, you can see that there's culture and tourism going right across the whole region. And there's actually creative industries as another of those little symbols. But they're actually showing whole different sets of opportunities across the region. So you've got a kind of shopping city break in Liverpool City. And then you've got much more family. There's 2 beach type opportunities. There's sort of a family, an events-based one. There's a safari park. There's a really big safari park right at the far east area. And there's where glass was invented or whatever, which is one of the other ones. But they're really marketing the whole thing. And actually what you get is a package which is attractive to people it's golf and things. The people who play golf, people who want to shop, people who want to go to the theatre and see really high-class, really good philharmonic music offer, people who want seaside experience, people who want to do things with the kids. Actually, it's a whole package that they're beginning to see together and offer as a city region, offering opportunities. So what benefit did it bring? We did some calculation on value from additional visits. So this is purely the additional value in the year itself alone. As a result of capital of culture. This isn't any gross tourism figure at all. This is just additional value. Obviously, Liverpool got a huge boost. And the blue one is elsewhere in the city region. And actually, there was feed out to the northwest and to the country as a whole. So there was a real benefit, even though it wasn't marketed, and even though these places were not at the time calling themselves Liverpool, they were calling themselves something else. The Wirral. Anyone heard of the Wirral? St Helens. Knowsley, Sefton, no. So they were calling themselves all these things, but they were still getting that sort of knock-on benefit. Because people were doing things like, it turned out that we had the pick up with the Lake District. Obviously the Lake District, which is in the northwest, is a really big tourist attraction. More people were coming, they're choosing to have their Lake District holiday, which is, you know, outdoor activities, walking plus beautiful things, maybe a bit of craft visiting. And then they were staying on for an extra weekend or more and doing that whole City of Culture thing. There's a real benefit there. Obviously, we're interested in what happens afterwards. Does it carry on, or is it just a blip, a one-off for 1 year only? What we're finding is that tourism figures are actually increasing in Liverpool City region against national trends. So with the downturn in the UK, visitor figures are going down, but actually staying visitors are going up, which is really quite astounding that you've got a rise of 8% compared with a national drop of 5%. The Christmas shopping numbers were up, so there's more shoppers, despite a national drop in footfall. And the national perceptions are staying positive and are becoming increasingly positive over time, despite the fact that Liverpool is a place with high public sector employment, which means that there is increased unemployment. So despite increased unemployment in the area, there's still a positive image. And I think what's really interesting is it's really on the map in terms of a place to go. It's a place to go for a weekend break. It's a place to go for those sort of slightly more expensive holidays, and particularly is seen as attractive for, as a business and event location. And they've been good at marketing the benefits of it having a cultural offer to a completely non-cultural audience. So they've got this global entrepreneurship congress, they put on special events in the evenings at the Philharmonic Hall. They've got specific Tate Liverpool gallery, private views and things. They're linking the kind of a cultural add-on to attract a big international event, and it offers real potential to do that. And I mean, the figures are going up. I mean, you can see there's been lots of discussion about this. There's always a drop-off after the year itself. So it always goes down afterwards. And the question is, how soon does it match up? Does the capital of culture effect kind of go back up again? So in Glasgow, it took 4 years for the capital of culture was in 1990, and it took till 94 before the figures matched up to 1990 levels. But they did, and then they carried on rising. Liverpool managed it in a year, so it's obviously doesn't have to be as long as that. But the trick is not to have it go down like this or back down to the level it was, so it's just a blip. So you can see that there's a blip in the volume of income, but it goes back up again. So this is a good sign that we're watching out for. And the other thing is that the room occupancy rates are staying high. So, you know, despite a downturn, room occupancy rates are high, but actually there's also been a huge growth in room stock. So you're getting a higher number of stays. And the other thing that you get is the weekend stays higher than the weekday stay. So you've got a kind of visitor-led economy, which is really allowing the visitor sector to be quite influential in shaping the regional economic development policy. And really overall, Liverpool's got a really strong focus on culture as a potential driver for economic development via the visitor sector. So culture is a huge part of the visitor sector, and it's seen as being a real potential add-on, and then that's seen as being part of the economic drive for development of the region. I thought about a few lessons that I should suggest for August 2017. For one of the things that came out really strongly, and this is probably something I didn't emphasise, but there were a lot of issues in terms of communication early on, which probably went against some of the benefits. So I think there could have been even greater benefits for both sides if the relationships had been developed right from the beginning. So it's really important to develop those relationships and communication channels with the visitor sector and with the wider business community. And I think I've already been to speak to a kind of wider business meeting that was talking about how they could get involved in August 2017. So I think there's potential there. And the more you get involved, it's a two-way process. The more you get involved and the more you offer opportunities and go in with ideas, the more the other side is interested. It's a straightforward stakeholder partnership issue. And really this came out really strongly. The businesses that chose to get more involved got more benefit, whatever their sector was. They really felt that. There's a real sense of a city and a region working together cross sector to kind of promote itself, and that came out really strongly, and it's changed the way maybe that the whole region's seen, and it's raised its profile, and it's allowed, I guess, the region to cling on to the coattails of Liverpool, which already has a brand, but it's also given a bit of a mix, a nicer mix to Liverpool's brand. It's not just Beatles and football, it offers a wider opportunity, and thus it offers a wider set of business opportunities for people around it. And I think that there's a real opportunity, basically. That there are benefits to tourism, and there's lots of ways that you can come up with ways that you can ride on this. I think particularly the City of Culture offers an opportunity to go beyond the traditional way people do tourism to actually get into new markets. So, for example, looking at adding on to a family offer, a more expensive few days stay, sort of picking up on the kind of middle-class parents' idea that their children should do culture. So, you go, you do camping, you do whatever you do, you have your holiday, your beach holiday, but you also go and do some visits and museums and things like that. And that way you're actually looking at a more high-spending group of people, young people, staying that bit longer, catching the festival crowd tends to be maybe the sort of up to 25 age group who spend almost nothing, stay on people's floors. If you can catch the next stage group up, spend more, they're into the boutique hotels, they're into gastronomy, there's a real opportunity to sort of just raise that kind of opportunity to go beyond those things that some of the cultural events can offer. So I think there's real potential there. If you want to know more about our work, there's a huge range of reports. I just talked about one area. These are all the different themes that we've worked on, and they're all available online. They're all free, available online. And thank you very much. If you've got any questions.